Hello, my name is Owen, and it is the end of June in 2023, which means we're halfway through the year, which means that I got to give you guys an update on my favorite books of the year. So I'm going to give you my top 5 books of 2023 so far. And then I'm just going to talk about them a little bit and just let you know like where my rankings are lying as a sneak preview for my end of the year video, a little check-in and a halfway point. And interestingly enough, the first 2 books I'm going to mention, number 5 and number 4, I have not done reviews on the channel. So if you've been here a while, these are fresh takes for me. And if you've never been here before, they're all fresh takes, so all the better for you. Starting out at number 5, we have part 1 of the Divine Comedy, Inferno by Dante. And I know what you're thinking, Owen, don't play games with us, all right? There's no way you're smart enough to understand Dante. And to that, I would say you're absolutely right. I wanted to do a review of Inferno when I read it, but then I realized when I sat down, I was not nearly smart enough to talk about one of the greatest poets of all time. And in terms of raw text, raw poetry, I understood very little of it by myself. I was in a college class at the time, so I helped that I had a professor, like a trained academic in Dante, to explain it with me. But also, I read the Hollander edition, Robert Hollander, and he really breaks it down for you in such a fantastic way, in a really digestible way. So I recommend, if you're reading Inferno, read the Hollander edition, because he makes it so easy to understand and really like delve deep into like what Dante was trying to get by with this message. And honestly, even like the base poetry itself is absolutely stunning, and obviously it's famous for like its fitting punishments of like certain sins. It equates to like certain punishments in hell, as Dante as himself inserted character like goes on this journey through the different circles of hell. What I found very interesting about this story was just Dante's overall philosophy about like right and wrong and like religion and obviously like hell and like heaven and stuff like that. But what I really appreciate about Dante, and like I said, I did not come to the conclusion by myself, this was given to me by my professor and by Hollander, is that Dante values reason above all else, and he gives the greatest punishments to those who know that they should be doing better and can do better, but actively choose not to. So it's not like in a fit of rage you lash out. You will be punished, but you won't punish nearly as bad as someone who does something lesser or perceived lesser, like you betray a friend. And you did it for your own gain, and you did it on purpose. And I kind of mess with that philosophy a little bit of the misuse of reason. And it's people who could do the greatest things, and when they don't, that's the greatest fault you could have in a person. And I think that's really deep, and that whole philosophy really runs through. And I feel like my perception of Inferno before I read it was that it's kind of not gory, but it's indulgent in like these punishments and like, oh, like look how I'm going to torture like these specific kind of people, these specific kind of sinners. But really the whole message of the story is not glorifying hell. It's not glorifying punishment or gore. And there's even moments where Dante, the character, sees this and he's like, oh yeah, they definitely deserve to be eternally burned to death. And then like his guide, Virgil, is kind of like, maybe we shouldn't be focusing on the punishment. Maybe we should focus on like what they did and why what they did was wrong. So it really is very nuanced in that sense. And the fact that Dante had himself as the main character provides a layer of like self-introspective about the way he thought about the world, and how like him as the narrator is telling him that he's wrong, but takes place in the future because he said he'd went on this journey in the past. It's a little bit complicated, all right? And there's scholars out there who write entire books on single lines of the Divine Comedy, so I don't expect to even cover a minuscule part of it, but I just thought it was absolutely fascinating, and it's no wonder why it's like some of the most famous works of all time. But that's my number 5. Number 4, we have another book I never talked about in depth, and that's Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey. His autobiography, memoir thing about just like some of his life experiences. Now, I am a big McConaughey fan. I haven't seen all of his movies, but the movies I have seen are fantastic, and I just love him as a personality. His book is exactly like you think a Matthew McConaughey book would be. He just tells outrageous stories from his childhood and from his early career, and like this whole thing is like the idea of like green lights and like taking your opportunities or whatever, hard work and all that stuff that got him to where he was in his life. But my favorite part, and I wish I would have listened to the audiobook, because apparently the audiobook's just fantastic because it's him that narrates it, and his voice is just like smooth, right? It's a very specific guy, Matthew McConaughey. But all his stories, when you're reading them, you're thinking, these are so fake. He has one story that he like dreamed that he was naked floating down the Amazon River. And then he's like, oh, so I'm going to go to like the Amazon River. And he's like, yeah, that wasn't right. Because in the dream, it was the Amazon River, but it was in Africa. She's like, all right, maybe I should have went to Africa instead. He goes to Africa and he like wrestles like the strongest guy in the village. And no one knew who he was because he was in Africa. I'm like, dude, you definitely made this up. There's no way you went to Africa on a whim and just wrestled a random guy and he was like named like strongest like white guy they've ever seen. Like, I'm not making this up either. But I'm like, Matthew, you are though. You are making this up. However, the way he tells it, it's just so interesting that it's either completely made up, but such a great story, or the only person in the world who could have actually done this is Matthew McConaughey himself. So it's just so entertaining, because even if it's all fake, and if you go with the mindset of like he's definitely making stuff up, it's still a great read. It's an entertaining read, and he's such a fascinating character, a real life character. So I really recommend Green Lights by him. It was a lot of fun to read. Number 3, we have The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. This book was recommended as like a good book for someone who's like doing a big change in their life. They're trying to find their purpose, because that's what the whole book is about. It's kind of like fairy tale-esque. Like the plot is as important as like the meaning, and like a lot of the meanings are really hammered home about like you got to find your life's purpose and you have to dedicate your life to it, or else like you won't be fulfilled and you won't reach like your full potential. It's something that really hit me at the right time. As someone who's graduating college, who graduated college at this point, it's a transition point, and you're going to your next stage of life, and it's hard to figure out like what the overall goal trajectory of your life should be or is currently. And this one is like, you might not know, but once you know, you have to dedicate yourself wholeheartedly to it. And then everything will work out. And as the book says, the universe will conspire to give you everything you wanted and more, which I think was super inspiring. And it's it's a short read, but like I said, it's not very plot heavy, but it's very inspiring. And I think the messages there are just so sublime and so simplistic, but so deep at the same time, that I really enjoyed them. So that's my number 3. Number 2 was a book that I read relatively recently. It was My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. One of my favorite authors. I've read 3 of her books now, and My Cousin Rachel was my favorite of all her books. She is probably the best author that I've ever seen at like towing the line of genres. A lot of her books are like towing the line of romance, and she writes romance extremely well, but there's always just the underlying menace in her books. There's always underlying tension, and there's underlying thriller, and she is masterful at creating mystery and creating suspense. And I think this is like the most nuanced, maybe nuanced isn't the right word there, but most complicated in terms of dynamics, where like the mystery that I really had no idea where it was going to go or how it was going to play out. And I think the main character in this book was her strongest protagonist that I had read. Very flawed protagonist, but very realistic in terms of his like mindset and the way he thought about the situation. And I was like gripped from start to finish. I really wanted to see how it ended up, and how it ended up was fantastic. So I highly recommend this book. That's My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier, number 2, and I can't wait to read more of her books. But I read her 3 most popular books, so potentially it's down from there, but potentially not. Moving on to my number 1 book so far in 2023, and it's Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. Now, if you stuck around the channel a little bit, you know that I absolutely adore the Farseer trilogy. And I just wanted to choose just one book from that trilogy, because probably Assassin's Apprentice or Assassin's Quest could have made a play for the top 5. But I just want to pick one from the series, and I think Royal Assassin was my favorite of the 3. I talked about it at length in multiple videos on this channel, but I just think Robin Hobb has some of the best character work and character-focused stories, especially in the fantasy space, that I've ever read. Fitz is probably one of my favorite protagonists of all time. Another flawed protagonist, but he's flawed in a way that it just makes sense to me. Like everything he makes a mistake on, I'm like, you know what? I'm not sure I would have done better than you, and I'm sure I probably would have done the same thing. I really connected with him as a character and his mindsets and his faults. I understood exactly where he was coming from, and that happens with a lot of the characters in the story. A lot of them are very nuanced, and you could always understand where they're coming from, even if they do something that isn't necessarily something that's a good thing to do or the right thing to do. And my favorite thing, and I talk about this at length in my videos if you want to check those out, but Robin Hobb is great at slice of life fantasy in the sense that like it's not always slay the dragon, save the princess. It a lot of times just fits in his life. And the dynamics that evolve from like his mentor figures, just from like his day to day, from his love interests, it just slowly develops. It's like real life. It's him living in this castle as the bastard of a former heir to the throne. And it's just like the dynamics at play. And some people dislike it because it's slow paced, but that's why I love it, because it's entirely character focused and makes those action sequences and the big moments so much more fruitful because we're not rushing to them, right? We're taking our time, we're developing the characters, and we're falling in love with the characters before we put them in potentially life-threatening situations, which fits. Got to be one of the most unlucky men in the history of the universe. Poor guy, poor guy. But I loved that trilogy, and Royal Assassin, which is the second one, if you didn't know, is absolutely fantastic. Had me at the edge of my seat. I think the climax of that book is just so like stomach tight, in knots, gut wrenching, scary, toe clenching, other adjectives describing my feelings. It's a lot of fun. But yeah, I haven't read too many books. My goal at the end of the year is to read around 40-ish books. So who knows? Maybe my top five is my top five. Maybe I won't read anything that breaks into it, but I highly doubt that, guys. I highly doubt that. I read a lot of great books so far this year. I haven't really fully disliked any of the books. And I talked about this in a specific video, my only disappointment was Essex Dogs, which I read a couple of months ago. Other than that, I've been enjoying everything because, you know, not to toot my own horn, but I got a pretty good instinct for things, right? I don't read anything that I hate. I don't approach anything that I think I won't like, and so far I've been killing it. I was just disappointed with Essex Dogs. I thought I could have done a little bit more, but at the end of the day, it wasn't like a waste of time. It just wasn't as good as I wanted it to be, and so far, I'm having a great reading year. And let me know what you guys like so far. What are your favorite books of 2023 that you read so far? Throw those in the comments. Maybe I'll read them in the second half, and then we could be buddies together. In my final year list, maybe your book will be on my list, and then we could have something to bond over, you know? But be sure to like and subscribe. Your support helps tremendously. And expect more videos like this in the future, guys. I post very frequently, more frequently than possibly ever. And who knows how long I can maintain it. But I need your validation. Thanks for sticking around.